about ultra-processed food. My guest, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken, is a practicing infectious disease physician and associate professor at University College London. His book is called Ultra-Processed People, the science behind the food that isn't food. Chris, for a while, the commercial food industry pushed the idea that we could all eat pretty much whatever we wanted and stay healthy as long as we were exercising. To be clear, you agree that exercise is very important for human health. So what is the evidence that lots of daily movement isn't enough to counteract the effects of a poor diet?
I love these questions because you're really anticipating my caveat. Yes, exercise. I'm still going to do it. Exercise is incredibly good for you. It will not help you lose weight. And I've got to say, so I'm an MD. I also have a PhD in molecular biology. I thought I understood how the human body worked, and it turned out when I started writing this book that a significant portion of how I understand human metabolism comes from the Coca-Cola Corporation. So Coke funded a network of scientific papers, research institutes, huge population studies to try and show that if you do exercise, you burn more calories, and so that would justify the idea that a Coke or any other high-energy food or drink would be really a source of energy as much as a source of weight gain. In other words, they were promoting the idea you can outrun a bad diet. Now, what it turns out is that since the 1990s, we've had a growing body of very, very robust scientific literature that shows that across humans and all other mammals ever studied, when we do exercise, we do not materially affect the number of calories we burn. Now, people really struggle with this, and I've talked about it with physicists. They say, "Oh, you're violating the laws of thermodynamics." In fact, that's not true. So I'm an 85 kilo man. I burn around 3,000 calories a day. And what's clear is if I went and lived as a hunter-gatherer in Tanzania, this is where a lot of the studies have been done, instead of being a sedentary, UK-based academic, I went and chased antelope all day, I would still burn 3,000 calories a day. In the UK, because I'm burning those 3,000 calories and I'm not chasing the antelope, I have calories left over, and what I do is I spend them on inflammation, anxiety, and high levels of reproductive hormones, harmfully high levels of reproductive hormones like testosterone. And to be clear, high levels of testosterone doesn't make you more manly or strong, it just increases your risk of cancer. So your body, when you do exercise, is stealing energy from these other systems that are being overused. So that's why exercise is such a great treatment for anxiety and depression, and why it reduces so much pain if you can do it regularly, because you're taking energy away from inflammation, you're taking energy away from worrying. So this evidence is incredibly robust. It's absolute consensus within the field amongst the people that aren't funded by the food industry. And one of the most exciting bits of the book was showing that when we talk about food as a public health issue, when it comes to weight, it's not 50% of the question. It's not like people need to eat less and do more. The do more is an entirely separate part of the health equation. Everyone does need to do more. That's a separate pandemic activity. But when it comes to our weight, eating is the problem, and it is ultra-processed food that is fueling the pandemic.
You take on this age-old question in the book of willpower with a candid example from your own life. You already mentioned your brother who lives in the States. As it happens, he is your identical twin. But when he moved from the UK to Boston, his body and yours stopped being identical.
He moved to a food swamp. So you've heard of food deserts. Everyone's aware of these, where particularly people with low incomes are unable to access any fresh food. Well, where he was living in Boston was a slightly different arrangement. There was just a huge amount of junk food and fast food, and he and I share obesity genes. In the UK, my obesity genes aren't given much opportunity to express themselves because my wife and I fill our house with good food, and we cook ourselves, and we're very fortunate that we have money and time and resources to eat real food, which we know is way, way more expensive than eating ultra-processed food. But yes, Zahn put on I can't do the pounds kilos conversion, but he put on 30 kilos, so a massive amount of weight in a short period of time. And it's a very good genetically controlled experiment of the difference between the US and the UK food environments, or he was also very stressed out at the time. So willpower, there is, I think, in the States, because of the work of people like Aubrey Gordon and other commentators, we're starting to sort of go, maybe people who live with excess weight aren't just lazy. I want to really, if people only get one thing from reading my book, is that idea is absolutely morally, ethically, and scientifically untrue in every possible sense. In the 1970s, in the US, every single demographic and ethnicity began to gain weight at the same time. Now, people with low incomes gained a bit more weight, and people with high incomes gained a bit less, but everyone started at the same time gaining weight. Whether you're a rich, white, older woman, or you're a young Hispanic man, everyone gained weight. Now, you cannot come up with a hypothesis that explains how all of those different groups of people started simultaneously to lose moral fiber. It doesn't make any sense. So what was happening is that across the board, all the groups were starting to eat food that was dysregulating their body's way of saying, I am full, ultra-processed food. And we have loads of evidence that if we make poor people not poor, that they spend their money really sensibly and they would all like to eat healthy food. In the States, in Canada, in the UK, the problem that we're talking about really primarily affects low-income people. It affects all of us, so it is now affecting my kids too. But I have a choice once I have the information. The discomfort writing book is that someone might read it but be unable to make a change. They may not be able to access any fresh food, and they certainly may not be able to afford it. And that is primarily people of colour, indigenous communities, groups that are already extremely disadvantaged in other ways.
What do we know about why UPF foods seem more likely to lead to addiction-like eating behaviors than the non-UPF versions of the exact same foods?
That's a really intriguing question. For a long time, people have been quite resistant to the idea. Scientists have been resistant to the idea of food addiction. Food addiction is very, very real. And people listening, about 50 to 60% of your listeners will be listening to this and will have an addictive relationship with some food products. They may eat them to excess, they may think about them the whole time, they may binge on them sometimes, they may binge and purge. Those foods will almost always be ultra-processed. Almost no one binges and purges on their mother's lasagna, on the spaghetti they made themselves, on even a cake they made themselves. So we think that part of the issue is the rate of calorie delivery. So if we look across the board at addictive substances, shots are way more addictive than weak ale. Drugs that you snort or inject are far more addictive than drugs that you chew. Tobacco in a cigarette, where you inhale it, it gets directly into your brain, far more addictive than when you chew tobacco. And so the speed of delivery of the sugar, fat, and protein that ultra-process allows, because it's so soft, and the particle size is so fine. Real food, if you have a steak or a piece of sourdough bread, if you make a steak sandwich using sourdough bread, you've got to chew every mouthful. You're not getting those nutrients nearly as quickly. Ultra-processed food, you consume your calories, twice as fast some of the time. So it may be the rate of delivery, but also this is food that's just being focus grouped. So every year we know that, you start with, take any random breakfast cereal, there's box A and box B, and the testing scientists at the company put it to a panel, and one of the many things they measure is how much do people eat. And if people eat more of box A, that's the one that goes on the shelf. And next year, they invent a box C, and they trial that against box A. If people eat more of that, that's the one that goes on the shelf. And this has been happening since the 1960s. So the food, this hasn't been an evil project, I don't believe, to create addictive food. But the food industry is certainly very at ease with the notion of addiction, aren't they? I mean, we have cereals in the UK called Crave. We have a slogan, once you pop, you can't stop. The food industry knows that what they're making at this point is addictive. And that's why I wrote the book in the style of The Easy Way to Quit Smoking, which is this. It's a very, very well-researched book about quitting smoking, where you smoke while you read. And it works as well as chewing nicotine patches, chewing nicotine gum, putting on patches. It's as effective as any other smoking cessation method, and it's recommended by the World Health Organization. And that was the book I had in mind as sort of template to learn about this food while you're eating it. And if you think you live with addicted relationship, then to any of your listeners, I would say just go and find out about ultra-processed food. And, you may find, if you can find it disgusting, that abstinence is the very best policy. We know that moderation with addictive substances is almost impossible with everyone we've ever studied. So I have an addictive relationship, and now I am abstinent. I'm just very lucky I can afford to do that.
My guest is Dr. Chris Van Tulleken, a practicing infectious disease physician and associate professor at University College London. His book is Ultra Processed People: The Science Behind the Food That Isn't Food. You're listening to Think. I'm Chris Boyd. It's an interesting approach, Chris, to talk about abstinence to food. I mean, historically, people have said, well, that doesn't work when you're trying to deal with disordered eating because you can't quit eating cold turkey, but you can quit ultra-processed foods cold turkey and still have a complete healthful diet.
That's right. This has always been the main problem with thinking about food as addictive is just it's impossible to stop eating. You have to be moderate with food. And I think the main utility of the UPF definition is, at least in theory, it is discretionary food. And I've had a few people saying, well, are you at risk of inducing another form of orthorexia, a kind of clean eating? And we know that restricted diets in anyone with any eating disorder can be really harmful. I've had a few lay people ask that question. I have had many psychiatrists and experts in eating disorders. In fact, the chair of our Royal College of Psychiatrists eating disorders faculty got in touch to say that there is a growing body of evidence that many eating disorders may be because of the food as much as the individual. In other words, the disordered eating, the strange relationship we have with these products that we've never had historically with any food, maybe because we're not really eating real food. And there is a school of thought that I subscribe to, and I'm very conscious people will be listening who live with eating disorders. So I also want to caveat and say I'm not an eating disorders clinician, but I know this evidence and I think it is quite good. There is an idea that when you quit ultra-processed food, in fact, you have more choice because the world of real food opens up to you. And ultra-processed food is fundamentally made of 4 animals, maybe really 3 animals. It's made of cows, pigs, and chickens, and about 4 crops. It's made of rice, wheat, corn, and soy. And then those 7 ingredients are flavored, textured, bit of plant oil added, but that's the corn and the soy, and emulsified, and the additives are added, and it can then be turned into anything from a pizza to a cake. So real food is far richer. It contains all these molecules that we know we need. And there's another idea that one of the reasons we're eating so much is because we're actually micronutrient deficient. Ultra-processed food has very few real nutrients, or the tens of thousands of phytonutrients that we know we need. And so it may be that we eat so much because we're searching for real nutrition. And when you eat real food, one of the reasons it fills you up is because it contains all that stuff and it stops you eating. So I think the evidence will show, as it comes out, that people who live with eating disorders may benefit from reducing UPF intake and eating a wider variety of real food.
Before I let you go, if people are hearing this and are already experiencing that disgust that you've described, the more you learn about ultra-processed foods, will we always know them when we see them? Remind us once again of the sort of quick way to know that something on a supermarket shelf is not good for us.
If it's wrapped in plastic, if there's anything on the ingredients list that you don't find in a typical domestic kitchen, then it's likely to be an ultra-processed food. If there's a cartoon character on the pack, if you've ever seen an ad for it, if there's a health claim, if it says it's vitamin-enriched or high in fibre or probiotic or low in fat, all of those things are very, very likely to be ultra-processed. If you can afford it, if you have the time, if your contract at work allows you to it, if your children will eat it, and you can go and buy ingredients and make food that you're probably, for most of us, it's our great-grandparents ate. Go and get any recipe book and start cooking, and then you will not be eating ultra-processed food. It is impossible to make ultra-processed food in your own kitchen because you aren't making it for profit. You're making it for people you like or love. You're doing it to nourish them and to create a bond with them. So really anything you cook from scratch in your kitchen will be good food and associated with good health.
Chris Van Tulleken is Associate Professor at University College London, a practicing infectious disease physician, and a broadcaster on BBC TV and radio. His book is called Ultra Processed People, the science behind the food that isn't food. Chris, thank you so much for the conversation.
It's been such a pleasure. I loved your questions, and it's an absolute pleasure to come on and talk with you.
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. You can get the podcast wherever you get podcasts, or you can listen at our website, think.kera.org. Again, I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.